hello, and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discuss everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Team Needham podcast studio, and we are super excited to have Rachele Pojednic on our show today. She is a health and wellness coach, a nutrition and exercise expert, and going to be talking about optimal health strategies and muscle physiology. So, Rachele, welcome to our show.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your history and how you ended up on our show.
Yeah, the connection was made through the industry lab that I lead. So I'm a classically trained scientist, you might say. I've been doing work in the muscle and supplementation space for about 15, 20 years. So did all my training on the East Coast, and post-COVID actually ended up moving to the West Coast and transitioned from academia primarily to industry. And so I now have a foothold in an academic faculty appointment at Stanford, but also lead Restore Labs at Restore Hyper Wellness, where I take all of the skills that I developed in traditional academia and transferred them over into understanding some of these complementary therapies that we're all using for human performance and for optimization and longevity and healthy aging, things like red light therapy, infrared sauna, cryotherapy, IV micronutrients. And so it's been a really fun transition, and that's how we got connected.
All right. Well, now that you mentioned some of those biohacking things that's commonly talked about now, I'm going to have some questions for you. So,
I'm ready.
yeah. All right. So, first of all, one of the things that we get questions all the time. We feel you probably know Jan and I are both pharmacists, but we don't believe in drugs to treat long-term disease, most long-term disease. Now, we do believe in hormone replacement because it helps restore our bodies to a more optimal state, how we were when we were younger. So, but we always preach that you can't go on hormones and expect your body to magically be optimal if you don't maximize your sleep, your diet, and your exercise. So first of all, I want to talk about those things. Can you talk about those things a little bit and how important those things are? Do you think they're important?
I think they're foundational to a healthy life, right? So part of the world that I have lived in over the last 10 or 15 years is this practice called lifestyle medicine. So I did my postdoc at Harvard at the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine there, and I'm the director of education at Stanford Lifestyle Medicine now. And this is one of the things that is just really a pillar of not only the work that I do, but also the life that I live. And so, I call it baking the cake, right? Is you've got to make sure that you put all of those ingredients into the cake first. You want it to rise, you want it to bake appropriately in the oven when you get all those ingredients together. And then you can start to think about how to put those, buttercream frosting, although we're all avoiding sugar these days. But you really think about what you can do to add on, but without exercise, a proper diet, sleep. I would add stress reduction and probably some social connection in there. Those pieces are foundational. And if you don't have them, then, things really do start to go sideways from a health perspective.
Exactly. I love your analogy, and I didn't realize it until you really said it, but we always say, oh, that's just icing on the cake. And I think I've even said that about sauna therapy or red light therapy one time. Well, yeah, that's just icing on the cake once you maximize the other things.
Yeah, for sure. And,
Yeah.
I think that can be used concurrently, right? So I think about my own self. So I'm a cyclist and a skier. And when I want to recover from those things, I will go and use those modalities. And there's some really good research that we're using at Restore Labs, partnered with MGH and Harvard Medical School, looking at using cryotherapy for long COVID symptoms. And, there's some ways that we can use these therapies. But even in that case, we would want to make sure that people are doing these foundational behaviors in their life before we start to think about how we can add on.
Absolutely. I love that. So Janet, what questions do you have for Rachele?
Okay. So I feel like we are facing huge crisis in our nation with healthcare. And Shawn and I have been looking at this for years. And in the past 3 decades, it's gotten, further and further. I think statistically, when you look at when somebody goes in for like a knee or a hip, it's really changing. So, what is your feeling on how we can change this? Because obviously, what we've done in the past maybe 30 or 40 years, from at least our healthcare world, hasn't really been working very well. So, I would love some input on how we're going to change this dynamic.
I absolutely love this question. So this is something that I've been working on again since working at the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine at Harvard and now at Stanford, being the director of education. One of the things that I think about every day, Janet, is how we can educate our clinicians on and in these foundational spaces that we're talking about, exercise, nutrition. And if you look at, and I've published on this several times, if you look at the amount of hours that a aspiring medical doctor or nurse practitioner or anybody that's operating in this space gets in nutrition, in physical activity, it's practically zero at
Mhm.
most of the institutions where they're being trained. And so this is a lever that I think that we have not pulled yet. We barely even touched it, is how can we adjust curriculum so that our clinicians see how powerful the exercise and nutrition interventions are in that clinical space. And I think about it as, we can use it as a treatment for sure, but we should be really using this as a prevention tool more
Mhm.
than anything, right? So we want to keep people healthy. And so if our clinicians and our practitioners are not educated in the power of these therapies, then the needle is just going to keep moving in the direction of treat and react and charge people tons of money to do things
Mhm.
that could have been prevented in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Janet mentioned it. It's, we are on a trajectory, and it just seems like the younger and younger population is getting sicker. And maybe even sometimes you see the younger people are sicker than, older people that have better lifestyles. So that's where she was going with the knee replacement thing. It's like we have patients that routinely get knee replacements or hip replacements now, and it's largely due to their lifestyle when they're in their 40s. And it used to be people didn't do that till they were in their knee didn't wear it till they were 65 or 70. So we definitely have to do something. I mean, obesity is epidemic in this
Mhm.
country, and we have to change that in order to just be a thriving population.
100%. And like I said, I think prevention is such an important part of this. So if we think about it from the perspective of the clinicians, making sure that they're educated, but we need to get our kids moving. We need to make sure that they are getting, the education that they need at their sort of level and through their lens as well. I have this initiative at Stanford that I'm so excited about. We've got a bunch of high school kids that are participating in what they're calling lifestyle medicine clubs, kind of
Mhm.
around the in the Bay Area, but they're expanding nationwide. We've got this amazing website that's coming up where they're talking about everything that we're saying, but through the lens of a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, right? And they're making smoothies and they're, updating their recipes to take out the sugar, and they're, having gratitude days and making their journaling and having, opportunities to socialize with each other. That social connection piece is so hard for them right now because they're all on their screens all the time. And so I think about this as kind of like a multi-pronged infiltration, Janet, is
Mhm.
we have to educate at so many different levels here. And the earlier that we can get at these kids to make sure that they're getting what they need and how to learn about moving their bodies, eating their fruits and vegetables. I mean, this is easy stuff. And it's a really, pardon the pun, I feel like it's low hanging fruit here that we can
Yep.
really start to use. And so that's really the avenue that I'm taking, is how can we get this really good information to people as early as possible?
And you mentioned, Rachel, you mentioned it's easy stuff, but and you know this, I'm just kind of reiterating, and I love your comment, but you mentioned it's easy stuff. It's easy for you, it's easy for us because we live it and we talk about it all day long. But if a 16-year-old kid has never been taught this easy stuff, it's not easy for them because they're ignorant, for lack of a better term, they're ignorant about what healthy eating is. Going back to smoothies, and I mentioned, I'm glad you said they take the sugar out of their smoothies, because how many people have counseled on their diet? And they say, well, no, and we're like, okay, well, what do you eat every day? Oh, well, I eat healthy. I had this smoothie for breakfast, and I get 2 big spoonfuls of peanut butter in it, and Greek yogurt, and I put an apple in it, and a banana in it, and some berries in it, and some kale, and then I throw some whey protein powder, and it's like, your smoothie is like 700 calories
Or
already.
more.
I mean, so you thinking the smoothie is healthy is maybe not the best thing. I'm a big believer in not drinking your calories, and that includes alcohol, soda, and even smoothies. I'm not necessarily a big believer in smoothies because everything you put in a smoothie is a lot harder to eat than it is to swallow, to swallow a liquid. So, but anyway, we have to train them for that. So can you mention about, it's easy, but it's not easy if you don't grow up being taught those things.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So the answer is easy. The implementation and the solution of how to do it is actually quite challenging and quite hard. And I talk about this a lot when we look at nutrition. So nutrition and exercise are kind of my 2 fields that overlap necessarily. So I work with, young people, I work with older people, I've worked with, war fighters and with athletes. And, the idea that you're talking about is so true. We need to meet people where they are, and we need to educate them, because all of these people are needing this information. And it is oftentimes very shocking to me how little that they know specifically about nutrition or how to move their body. And yet they need it so badly. So if I think about, my young people, they need to make sure that they're eating these healthy foods so that they can show up and learn every day without, being, buzzing from sugar or like crashing in the afternoon. If I think about my war fighters, this is a high stakes population where if they don't have the proper nutrition, going out into the field, or, the firefighters that I work with, it's really dangerous if they're not prepared from a nutritional perspective. And so I think, this idea of how do we get this good information that is kind of the same person to person to person. Like, I'm going to teach my 17-year-olds pretty much the same things I'm going to teach my 60-year-old, almost retired firefighter. But it's not being taught at the foundational level. And so we do need to get this information in there. It's simple information, but it's very challenging to get people thinking and talking about it.
So I'm going to get into some of these excuse me, some of these biohacks, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay.
Sure.
So you mentioned you were a cyclist. Jan and I are both cyclists. So congratulations. We love cycling, and we try to do everything we can to maximize our performance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and being regular people that have real jobs and not being able to train like a Tour de France rider. I just wanted to put that on there.
Same.
We're not doing everything. We know that, but we just don't really aspire to do everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
agreed.
So anyway, okay. Cold plunge therapy. You mentioned cryotherapy. I don't know if when you talk cryotherapy, are you talking cold plunge therapy?
No, 2 different mechanisms. Yeah.
Well, I know you're going to know this answer, so I'm going to can we talk about cold plunge therapy?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So here's my thoughts about cold plunge therapy. Now, I'm not saying after, a really hard workout, because, we know professional athletes use cold plunge therapy all the time. And for its anti-inflammatory effect, after a really hard workout, cold plunge therapy makes sense. But now we're seeing it people are doing it on a daily basis, either taking cold showers or doing cold plunge therapy. And they're doing it to, for longevity, to help their bodies, recover and live longer. Now, here's my everything I bring back, whether it be how we eat, whether it be how we move, whether it be the day-to-day things we do in our life, I always bring it back to ancestrally speaking. What did our ancestors do? I'm going to say this about cold plunge therapy. Nowhere in history do I know where our ancestors gravitated towards super cold water. In fact, they stayed away from it. Animals do too. What animals jump into a cold river for the heck of it? I mean, there are dogs that chase birds. I get that. That's a little bit different. But they don't do it just for the heck of it. And animals, all of us, humans, or most all animals, we gravitate towards heat. So the cold plunge therapy doesn't make a lot of sense to me to do it daily as an exercise to help with longevity. You go.
Yeah. So I will offer that there is times when you should and times when you shouldn't do things like cold plunge or cryotherapy. And you actually mentioned one that is being used a lot, and it's being used, kind of to your point, inappropriately. So what we're seeing in the literature is that if you do have a big solid workout, particularly if you're doing some kind of high intensity or resistance training type of workout and you cold plunge afterwards, you actually blunt and impair that repair process of the
That
muscles
makes
that you've
sense.
just torn apart. You guys are pharmacists. This makes total sense, right? If you think about, this literature holds true if you look at NSAIDs during and around exercise, right? So things like Advil. We're also noticing the same things. And also, I'll go to things that our ancestors didn't do. These like very, very high potency greens powders and really, really high potency supplements that are anti-inflammatory. All of these things are going to act in the same way post workout, where your muscles are inflamed on purpose, right? So we have done the exercise, you have lifted your you've done your bicep curls, you've lifted your bar, you've done your deadlifts. You have purposefully challenged your muscles in a hormetic way. So, right, just enough stress, not too much. And if you get into a cold plunge or you take an Advil or you take these really high potency anti-inflammatory supplements, what we see is the signal between your damaged muscle and your immune system is blunted. And so your immune system doesn't recognize that there is tissue that needs to be repaired. And so you essentially lose all, not all, but a good portion of the gains that you have just tried to encourage in your body. So to your first point, I would say don't do very cold therapy after a very hard workout. It sounds intuitively like a good idea, but as it turns out in the literature, it actually can impair all of the work that you have tried to do to your body. As far as the other, sort of ancestral piece, I have to be completely honest, I am not well versed in the historical significance of cold plunging. But I will tell you a couple of things that we are seeing that can happen when we go into the cold. One of the first things that happens is in both cases, you induce this fight or flight response, right? So if you've ever experienced jumping into a cold lake or water or whatever, or even getting into a cryotherapy machine like we have at Restore, the first thing that will happen is your body will have a really similar response to exercise, right? So your blood pressure increases because all of the blood goes to your central trunk area, your heart rate increases. And if you've ever done a cold plunge, the first thing that you do is like, you start to breathe really heavy, right? So you have this fight or flight mechanism. And this is true for both cryotherapy and for cold plunge. And then what interestingly happens is almost immediately after, your body and your parasympathetic nervous system starts to overcompensate for that sympathetic response. So if you've ever done this and you're sort of hyperventilating, the thing that you have to do in order to stay in that cold phase is you've got to start to slow your nervous system down. And so this is where I'm going to come back to this idea of this sort of ancestral piece here, is that we live in a world that is constantly fight or flight, right? We have inputs day to day, that is, whether it's a, a ping on your email or a ding on your calendar or your kids, calling you all the time or whatever, we never have that moment where we just. And so what I think is really interesting about these cold therapies is, yeah, we might not have done it from an ancestral perspective, and I'm not sure about that, but I'll take your word on it. But what we did have from an ancestral perspective is fight or flight, very separated from rest and digest, right? So if we do think about that hunt, or, the proverbial being chased by a lion, there was time in the cave, if you will, if we're going to go with this analogy, to bring ourselves down and to recover from a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system perspective that we just don't have right now. So it's possible that this mechanism, which I think is the benefit both of cryotherapy and cold plunge therapy, is this relaxation response that's almost forced on us. It's an overcompensation for both of these therapies that might actually mimic our ancestral response that we have completely blown out of the water with technology and the way that our day-to-day work. So maybe it actually is mimicking some of our sort of ancestral responses that we have managed to out technology and out schedule from our day-to-day lives. And I would offer that that is the same thing that happens with heat. So you don't have that immediate fight or flight response with heat. Usually it takes some time to build, but then, if you sit in a sauna, let's say, for example, it takes 5 or 10 minutes before your blood pressure goes up, before your, heart rate starts to come up, but you do have that same moment of relaxation response. And I think I would offer that that is probably the biggest benefit of these temperature therapies, is it forces us to do something that we should do, have always done, but don't do much anymore.
Well, I love that analogy. And really, when you think about it, I had a conversation with my friend who kind of started me thinking about cold plunge therapy. And his analogy was quite similar, not nearly as in depth as yours, but his thought is that, just like you're saying, cold plunge therapy is a stressor to your body.
Mhm.
Just like a workout is. A
Yep.
hard bike ride, a hard gym session, those are stressors to your body. And he mentioned, he goes, well, if you're working out 5, 6 days a week, you probably don't need cold plunge therapy, because you're already stressing your body with those workouts. And that's what cold plunge therapy is doing. And so I totally get that. And especially I love that what you talked about, when we work out, we don't get stronger when we work out. We get stronger when we recover with sleep and food.
Yep.
And so our body is looking for a certain adaptation. That's why we break our bodies down in our workout. That's why they're difficult. That's why, they are hard, depending on the intensity.
Yeah,
But
sure.
if cold plunge therapy will totally take that inflammation away, which is what we want to get the proper adaptations to get stronger and faster.
Yeah. So I'd love to tap into that. One of the things that one of the reasons that I am working at Restore is to basically fill this kind of absence of evidence problem that we have in this space. And one of the pieces of evidence that we don't really know yet, and this goes right to your point, is how often should we be doing these stressful things like cold plunge or cryotherapy? How long should we be staying in? What's the dose, right? I mean, we can sort of like analogize everything to like pharmaceuticals, but
Yeah.
What is the dose of cryotherapy or cold plunge? And we are actually seeing in some early data right now, mostly with a lot of these tech companies that are monitoring us constantly, that there is an upper limit to how often we want to be doing something like cold plunge specifically, or something like cryotherapy. And it does seem to be that like 2 or 3 days a week and separated from our workouts might be the best way to go about this, for exactly your point, is we want to make sure if we're doing something hard to our body in order to have that regeneration or recovery, we don't want to impair that regeneration or recovery, because that's where the real magic happens. I love it. I didn't mention this, but I'm a biochemist by training. So
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah. So that the pathways in my head, like if you were to see my thought bubble, you can see the sort of like inflammation pathways and where we bring it in. And where the exercise, if you think about muscle and, just something simple like a contraction and what that downstream effect is inside the cell, inside, the protein generation, transcription, translation. I can bring you back to 9th, 10th grade biology when everybody learned
Yeah,
that,
right.
is we want to make sure that we're not impairing those pathways and that we're enhancing them. And so, yeah, what is the dose? How often? I'm working on it. So hopefully I'll have more answers for you in the future.
Go ahead, Janet.
Well, there's such a huge relationship, but we have pieced it apart, I think, because of science, and how we think. But the connections between our brain and all the neurotransmitters and everything that's happening, if it's not the biological meant way, then there's actually, what I tell people, there's actually either a stop or the message doesn't get to where it needs to go, right? And so that balance is really interesting. It's fascinating because the point of like using Advil, I mean, that was very commonly done. I remember when I was in high school and college, if you're injured, you take, if you do this. But maybe sometimes we should let our body kind of naturally get to that process. But it's difficult because, like you said, we are in this tech world where everything is being thrown at us. So perhaps we're not working as smart at our exercise as we should. Like maybe we are thinking too hard about doing something, but we need to step back for that recovery and that repair. But that's where like nutrients and all these other therapies can step in and fill in those, because it's like, you could work out 7 days a week, but we know that that's not right.
Exactly. And it's so interesting, Janet. I think all the time, and I actually wrote a little piece on this, is that we're also obsessed with protocols right now,
Yep.
right? Where it's like, what exactly tell me exactly what I should do. And like,
we talk about that all the time.
yeah, tell me exactly what I should do. And it kind of drives me crazy because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it removes our sort of intuition out of the whole thing, right? Where it's like, if I'm telling you exactly what to do and you're not listening to your body and you're not saying like, hey, like something doesn't feel right, something doesn't feel like topped off, something doesn't feel great, and you're feeling bad, like, oh, I didn't hit my protocol today, and then it sort of like starts this like vicious mental cycle as well, which we know, to your point, once your brain starts to go sideways, the rest of your body is going to follow, right? But the other thing that really kind of drives me crazy about protocols is kind of what we were just talking a second ago, is what's going on and what's good for my 16 and 17-year-olds is going to be really different for somebody that's in their 40s. Don't even get me started on peri and postmenopause and what's the difference between males and females at that state, right? And then somebody that's, in their 70s and 80s. And so we need to think about how to change what we're doing and what we're up to based on how our bodies are responding, even at different life periods, which is why this protocol thing kind of always drives me bananas. Number one, we don't really know, back to the idea of dose, like what exactly is super optimal. But number two, it's going to be really varied person to person, and it's going to be really varied for that person throughout their entire lifespan. So I love that process that you're talking about is, thinking about what's going on in my body right now at this moment in time, at this stage of life, and what can I do to help enhance whatever it is that I've got going on. Maybe I've got a cold, maybe I've just gotten a cancer diagnosis, maybe I am at, like true optimization for my day and my time. But every day is going to be a little bit different, and listening to and paying attention to what's going on in your body is so critically important.
Absolutely. And, going back to our ancestors and protocols, did our ancestors get up in the morning and say, I'm going to walk 10,000 steps today? Did they say how many times they were going to lift something? I'm going to do 3 sets of 10. No. I mean, and we go into this all day long. Or somebody that, even, that worked with swinging a hammer all day long. I wonder how heavy this hammer is and how many reps I'm going to get in all day. No, they just worked. They moved all day. They lifted on and off. every once in a while they lifted something really heavy, and every once in a while they sprinted. I mean, that's really kind of
Yep.
the facts of it. And so when people, we always say this when people have excuses to not work out, because they want the details. It's like you're saying, it's not necessarily an excuse. I get it. They don't understand. It's just start where you're at and do something. Do something. It's really that simple. It does, and we talk about it a lot too. I mean, the amount of weight you use in the gym, it doesn't matter really that much. I mean, unless you're a power lifter or a bodybuilder, the amount of weight, the amount of reps, the amount of sets you do is really not that important, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny. I'm smiling because I'm teaching this class right now at Harvard, and people are, the class is on exercise and physical activity and muscle and how it affects your body. And all the students every single year, and this is it's at the extension school, so it's kind of like all comers, right? So it's like older learners, kids in high school and everybody in between. And they always wonder, like, what's the best exercise that I can do? And I'm like, team, I'm going to die on this hill. The best exercise that you can do is the one that you love and the one that you'll keep doing, right? Like that is the answer to the question. And nobody wants to hear it. They're like, no, should I be doing HIIT? Should I be doing,
Right.
HIIT? Should I be doing?
Something.
It's like anything, just anything. Like you want to go for a walk because that makes you happy in the woods, do that. You want to, go to Zumba class and dance, do that. Like, what are you going to do to move your body that you love? Because if you love it, you'll keep doing it.
Mhm.
Well, so I love cycling analogies, and I'm thinking about all this stuff going through my brain because I'm a competitive cross-country mountain bike racer. So,
Oh, cool.
and I have a coach, and when I hired him like 7 years ago, I was all in. Well, what about this and what about that and the details and blah blah and blah 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 blah. Anyway, and he basically said, you need to see, you can't see the forest through the trees. And definitely the details matter when you get up. I mean, even slightly competitive amateur level or really uncompetitive pro level. But he sent me a video one time on what the average professional cyclist does in their routines. The average professional cyclist spends 80% of their time in zone 1 or zone 2.
Yep.
They're not at zone 5. They're not at anaerobic. They're not sprinting. They do every once in a while, but 80% of it is just get on the bike and put in the time.
Yep.
Get on the bike and ride. That's the most important part. And these guys are professionals at it.
Totally.
So, I mean, amateurs need to understand the same thing. It really doesn't need to be that complicated.
I totally agree. It's funny. My husband is actually an athletic coach, so he's a rowing coach. And so he's been saying this for years, right? Where he's like, we had all these, again, it's in the athletic world, like how are we going to periodize or whatever. He's like, you know what my guys need to do? They need to get in a boat and they need to row. Like they need to learn how to they just need to learn how to take the strokes, right? Get your blade in the water, put your feet on the foot stretchers and put some pressure on the blade, right? And it's something that's always driven him crazy is he's just like, we can get all this technology in the boat. We can get all of these things that we're paying attention to. At the end of the day, put your blade in the water, move the boat together, and like that's going to make you faster. And the other thing that you're talking about that I think is so important is, training for life is different than training for a marathon or cross country, cycling competition. You're not going to be able to run a marathon if all you do every day is walk. That is true. That doesn't mean that the walking isn't super important, but like if you've got a goal and you do want to train for that, you got to get out there. You got to put your miles in. You got to, be smart about your training. And so I think the important thing is like these two things can be true at the same time, right? It's like if you have an athletic goal or you've got a performance goal, you do need to put in the time in order to get there. And you got to be patient. I say this all the time. You got to flex that patience muscle. You got to do it. And then eventually you'll be able to finish that 26.2 miles. But, training for life and then trying to train to reach your goals can coexist at the same time.
But I will say this. I want you to talk, Janet. I will say this. There's still some analogies with working out and life. And the most important thing is show up and work.
Mm-hmm.
It's like training in the gym. Just show up and do something. And really, and we tell a lot of people that. We taught our kids that. It's like, look, if you show up and work, just show up and work at your job, you will do 80. You will do better than 80% of the people around you.
Yeah. And
Janet, what
finding,
were you gonna
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just to kind of summarize, I think what I'm hearing from both of you, and I totally agree with this, is that we make things way too complex. And a lot of times at work, and even when we're working out, if we narrow down the focus, I think that that makes it easier. But then just do the work. And then the other part of it that I think is super important, that it's hard to touch. And we talked with a physician just yesterday about how you can have everything right, like you got their food balance, their sleep, their hormones, their nutrition, but they're still not there where they need to be. And it's hard to explain to people that, that space that our brain goes when we exercise, no matter at what level we are at. And that's the place too, what we want at work too, like to optimize, we need to kind of keep going forward without all this rather noise, I think, that's screaming at us, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to, right? Because I do think our performance is better when we get into that lane of comfort. And there is, even in running or riding long distances, there is a place where you go that you just keep going forward at that goal that brings your body into that space. It brings everything together, I believe.
get comfortable being uncomfortable?
Well,
Yeah.
yes and no, right? I
Yeah.
mean, where it should be a balance. But
Yeah.
I think, I guess where I'm going is our technology and our thought process of our culture is, if we have these 10 steps, that's the way it has to go. But not
I to-
really.
I totally agree, Janet. And I think one of the things, and we were just going to say, I think almost exactly the same thing, is by making things so complicated and so hard, it's a real turnoff to a lot of people that
Oh,
would otherwise just do things that bring them joy. And it's a
yeah.
big reason why I think a lot of people are not, doing the work, if you will. It's because they don't realize that the work is actually could just be part of their like fun or day
Yeah.
of their life, right? It doesn't
Right.
need to be this hyper, scheduled, all these things. Because I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of people that don't exercise or don't eat well or eat the healthy and right foods because, kind of back to our conversation of 15 minutes ago, we are stacked in our calendars literally from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. And people are like, how the heck am I going to fit all of this stuff in and do it perfectly and do it well and do it right? And they're kind of like, screw it. Like, I just don't have the
Yeah.
ability and the brain space and the time in order to do that. And the other piece that you just said, Janet, that just made me smile is one of my heroes from sort of all of my training and the work that I do is this guy, Mikai Csikszentmihalyi. Have you ever heard of him? He is the guy. He unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was this amazing psychologist that did all this work in an area that he termed flow, right? And so flow is that space that you were just describing, which is I'm out on my bike and I'm busting up this hill and I'm breathing hard, but like, man, I have never felt better or more in tune or more, kind of like in this space where you're doing something challenging and doing something hard, but time is flying by, right? And so you can find that flow space where it's just like, man, this feels amazing. But if we put that barrier and that block and that gate on, like, this has to be hard, this has to be highly scheduled, this has to be done a certain and specific way, people can't get themselves into that state because they're constantly judging and feeling like they should be doing something different or something better or like whatever the next, protocol or diet or hack or whatever is. So you're just tapping into something that I think is so important. It can be training. It can be, how am I going to get to 26.2? Or it can be, how do I get myself into this state, this feeling of flow and enjoyment and really appreciating what's going on in my body.
Yeah, for sure. So as we wrap this podcast up, I want to go back a little bit because my brain always thinks about analogies. And we were talking about cold plunge, and you're talking about put your body in a sympathetic state, fight or flight. And then you have to start breathing and relaxing and then to go into a parasympathetic state. Think about what workouts do when you do an interval on a bike. So you do a hard 3, 4, 5 minute interval and it puts you in a sympathetic state. You're fight or flight. But then between intervals, you have to recover and get in a parasympathetic state. I mean, that is the cold plunge analogy is so good with that. It's like, and it's just a reminder that that's what our bodies need. Our bodies need a mixture of both of those things.
Totally. The buzzword that I am trying to get everybody to use is this technical term that we use in the science. It's called hormesis, right? I mentioned it just a second ago, but I love this word. And I think the biohackers are going to start stealing this one from me, but you heard it here first. All right.
I did hear it earlier and I didn't know. I want to spell that. How do you spell that?
Yeah, it's HORMESIS, hormesis. So this is this idea of just a little bit of stress, not too much and not too little. And exercise is a perfect example of a hormetic stress, right? Too little, sedentary behavior, we know bad things happen, right? Your metabolism goes sideways, you get inflamed, your muscles atrophy, you get all these diseases because you're not challenging your body. Too much and you get injured, you have, inability to repair and regenerate. And that sweet spot right in the middle is I'm challenging my body, I'm moving it, doing a little bit of damage, not too much. I say this all the time to people. If I told you that I was going to make you do something that was going to raise your core temperature, increase your blood pressure, increase your heart rate, make you feel a little uncomfortable, make you feel a little stressed out, you'd be like, no, thank you, Rachel. I don't think I want to do that, right? But if I was like, yeah, but that's me, or Janet, that's you on my bike in my flow state, right? Like that is the hormetic stress where it's like, I'm stressing my body out. I'm challenging myself just a little bit, not too much. I'm pushing myself a little, not pushing myself into an injured state. But that is essentially, and you know this as biochemists, that's essentially how our body works and responds and changes, right? And so hormesis, that's the buzzword that we're all going to be using in 2020.
I'm going to start using that. I'm going to steal it from you.
Hormetic effect.
Sounds really smart.
Yeah. And a lot of therapies do that. If you think about heat, if you think about temperature, if you think about, we use red light, so you can think about different wavelengths of light are going to challenge your body. We also use hyperbaric oxygen, same thing. They're going to challenge your body and let your body and make your body sort of overcompensate for that challenge in that rest and recovery period, so that every day you get a little bit stronger. Every day you have less chronic low-grade inflammation because your body knows how to deal with it, right? And this really does start to address a lot of the root causes of many of the diseases that we're dealing with in our modern day.
Absolutely. So Rachel, as we wrap this podcast up, tell us what you have a passion for.
Well, I think that you have probably heard that I have a passion for bringing this information to people in a way that is usable, actionable, and that they can take into their day-to-day that makes sense for them. So education is number one and key for me. Science communication and making people understand how important these behaviors are is something that gets me up every morning of every day.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, you've helped us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So tell us if anybody has any questions, how they can get a hold of you. I'm streaming your website here.
Amazing. Yeah. So you can find me at rachelepojednic.com. I'm at Rachele Pojednic on the socials. And you can also check me out in the medical team page at restore.com, Restore Hyper Wellness, and check out my lab, Restore Labs, and all the good work that we're doing over there.
I absolutely love it. Rachel, we could talk for hours about these subjects. So we should have you back on again. I'd love to.
I would be more than happy to come back, and hopefully I'll have some new data by then that we can share.
All right. And stick on the podcast. We're going to wind up the podcast now, but I want you to stick around just a little bit so we can chat for just a minute off air. So listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Rachel, thank you for being on our podcast today. We really appreciate your wisdom and knowledge. Tune in Monday to our regularly scheduled podcast, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for listening.